Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Kaiser. I'm with RedThread X. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to introduce you to this panel here, and we're going to be talking about digital deterrence and AI. Jason's going to be leading this discussion along with Travis and Arnold and Charlie. And unfortunately, Amanda was meant to be here, and she's deterred herself.
Stuck overseas, I guess.
All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
All right, so I want to start off with, I don't like going down the line. I want, an active conversation. This is the one time we'll do that. Just kind of briefly introduce yourself, and since I think it's I did not come up with the title name, so it's a little bit negative, but I wanted to get, on a 1 to 10 scale, where you think we are in AI right now. So a 1 is, we're doomed, the world's ending. 10, the age of abundance is at hand. So.
Howdy. I'm Arnold Castro. I'm the Dean of AI at Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Although my title may make you think that I am an academic, I'm far from it. I come from the private world of business. I was a chief data and technology officer for an AI consulting firm. And I've been disrupting companies for a good while. I've been in AI for about 13, 14 years. And it's been a lot of fun. Obviously, the newest flavor is agentic, or Gen AI. Before that, but I think we're in a 5, maybe 6. I'm a little more optimistic than pessimistic. Although my background does have military in it, so I can really see the 1 being potential there, right? So yeah.
My name is Charlie Burgoyne. I'm the CEO of a firm called Valkyrie. We've been in Austin for almost 10 years. And we basically operate like a private DARPA here in town. I'm a physicist by training. Started my career working for Uncle Sam as a teenager at NASA, and then did a variety of things. Most of my 20s were spent doing crazy stuff for Uncle Sam. More recently, in conjunction with working at Valkyrie, I served as Special Operation Command's advisor for applied science under General Tony Thomas, and then I served General Kurilla as his advisor for applied science when he was taking point in U.S. Central Command. I'm likely to go back to SOCOM with the new administration. And yeah, everything I'll say today is not on behalf of any of those COCOMs or anything that's official in any DOW way. So excited to talk to you today. Oh, and my perspective on 1 to 10, I think the waveform has yet to collapse. I think 1 and 10 are still living in the same state. And I think that's why our generation, I've been considering it the transitional generation, where technology really avails itself, and we have a clear tactical line of sight to create a utopia as well as a dystopia. And so it can be, today it's both a 1 and a 10, depending on the decisions that are made literally in the next 5 years. So very, very optimistic and very concerned at the same time.
I have to say that was the most articulate way to say it depends that I've ever heard.
Are you a quantum physicist?
Castro.
Travis Bales, I'm the managing director of Booz Allen Ventures, which is the corporate venture fund for Booz Allen Hamilton. We're an early stage investor that acutely invests in AI, cyber, and defense tech. So I guess I'm the investor voice in this, so that means I'll be as quiet as I can. On the 1 to 10 scale, I kind of agree with Charlie, depending on the topic we're talking about. Could be a 1 or a 10, or it could be somewhere in the middle. And I think there's an element of like the 5 Ds of dodgeball, right? Like discipline, discernment, try to figure out how you're going to use it, right? Steady hands and common sense makes a great outcome. Less steady hands and maybe not common sense makes something else. So I think all those are in play.
So I want to start off, we're going to go with like the title here, right? It's a different way of saying, mutually assured destruction, the kind of the nuclear deterrent framework that went into place. Obviously, that was driven a lot by the scarcity of nuclear weapons and what was able to kind of stop that. And clearly, people it worked. We did not end up in nuclear war. How does that, when you think about that from an AI perspective, does the nuclear analogy in MAD actually hold, and then like where does that analogy completely fall apart? Anyone want to jump in?
From my perspective, again, me being a military guy, we are in an arms race right now, right? And we're trying to win this war. Us against China. I mean, we look at what the current administration is doing. I mean, I like to assume that it is all focused on that. If you think about energy, and then we're from Venezuela all the way up to Iran. Look at what Iran did. Start targeting AWS, right? So things like that start really playing a role into, okay, this is all about AI. Whoever reaches AGI is going to really control quite a bit. And that's kind of like if you think about, the nuclear bomb. Whoever created it first and showed its power they had the upper hand at that point. So it is 100% like it, in my opinion.
I'll try to be brief but I think this analogy is helpful. In the 50s, the American Navy became obsessed with the idea of inertial navigation. And basically what this was a way of creating a navigation system that didn't depend on any outside resources. You can imagine a big box surrounded with a heavy weight surrounded by springs. And the way that ball moved within that box indicated exactly where you were on the planet. At the time, it took a chunk of hardware about half the size of this room. From about 53 to 56, it was deployed on submarines. Today, that same level of fidelity is being developed onto CMOS chips and will be soon available within less than 20 cubic centimeters of space and run on less than 1 microvolt. Here's an implication for that. Currently, there are drones, nation-state developed drones, that are able to produce inertial navigators for less than 45 cents at scale. That means that you have a device that can now self-navigate in the air, a Class 2 or Class 3 drone that can navigate in the air for less than $15,000 and can do irreparable damage to a city or to a population space. General Carrillo, whenever he briefed us on what the priorities were for Central Command, really revolved around how do we make sure that there's an asymmetric cost to warfare. Because what he understood was that there's no real such thing as a doomsday moment. There is not really a nuclear meltdown equivalent that we need to be concerned about. War, certainly since 1944, has usually been won through attrition. Small manufacturing attrition, small arms attrition, and we're at a position right now where we're looking at technologies that are wildly more capable for wildly less cost that are creating an asymmetric disadvantage for the United States on the battlefield. And so I would say that I'm not really worried about the nuclear moment. I'm more worried about AI having a dramatic effect on the cost for manufacturing of munitions and capabilities that they'll just outspend us ostensibly, or outcost us really.
So my question, actually, I want to follow up on that. Then, what becomes in this age then the scarce asset? What is we have the arms race and we're pushing, but is it the bringing down the ability to build? Is it the energy stack? Like what becomes the thing that we're all racing ahead with?
Yeah, I mean, whether we've acknowledged it or not, certainly some of our near peers have acknowledged that the race to modular manufacturing, which is heavily dependent on technologies like AI, is really going to create the geopolitical asymmetries that they're targeting. They are like, and again, we're not going to mention specific AORs or specific nation states today or specific technologies, but that's really what's happening. Is they're not investing more and more into suicide vests. They're investing more into inexpensive ways to build Class 3 drones with advanced manufacturing techniques that allow you to send 4 pounds of C4 into a stadium from a 300 feet in the air Class 2 drone. And to be able to build 600 of those for what it costs us, half of one to intercept. Right? There are places right now, American FOBs or forward operating bases, that are intercepting Class 2, Class 3 drones that are costing well under $10,000 to deploy, and we're spending low 7 figures to intercept them every time.
And that math doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
I think for me, that is all true, what Charlie said. I think I would take another foundational approach to it, which is probably an undervalued, underserved part of the market is the intersection of cyber and AI. So when you talk about whether that's adversarial AI, you talk about, just 3 years ago, the MITRE attack framework had, 29 parameters. Now it's up to over 100.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what's the MITRE for? I don't know what this
It's
is.
an adversarial attack framework for adversarial AI attacks from a cyber perspective. So when we talk about that is all true from a kind of a foundational warfighting lens. But when we talk about critical infrastructure, energy, data centers, things are going to power what becomes the next deterrent. That's probably, in my humble opinion, the first line of the fight, is how you make sure that all that stays secure. And we've seen it just traditionally. We're probably not doing the best we could. So as this gets ramped up, there's going to be a critical market vector there.
I want to come back to something that you said when you said that we're in an arms race, the first to AGI. I kind of don't like that term, only the AGI, not the arms race, because I feel like it's a constantly shifting goalpost. I don't know what the hell. We were at AGI, now we're at ASI. Like it keeps being these new terms. Like so when you're coming up with a new tagline, in essence, or new definition, I kind of step back and say, okay, what are we talking about here? Like I remember, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, AGI was essentially like filling like the AI god, and now it's like, oh no, it's just stuff that can do what a PhD can do. Like, okay, so when we think about this, like, how are you defining this, and what's the race going to?
Well, first, before we go into that, one thing I left out is that I come from the manufacturing world. I travel the world doing AI for manufacturing. So what you brought up is correct, but I would argue that China already has the upper hand. Obviously, we know that. They're ahead of us in manufacturing in a lot of ways. They're doing amazing things with AI, and I've seen some of the stuff that they've done. I've been there, and it's a little scary to think that we're behind. Right now, obviously, we have the upper hand in many other things, but I'm not sure if manufacturing alone is going to win that. Now, to pivot back to your question, the reason I say that, AGI, now what is AGI? It's not necessarily a PhD, because I know, I have 2 masters, no PhD, but I know a lot of PhDs that are just not the greatest, right? And I'm in academia. Nothing against those people, but
I'm married to a PhD, so be careful.
There you go. PhD means nothing. Now, to me, AGI is going to be an entity, right? Because one of my courses, for example, I teach agentic AI, Introduction to Agentic AI, how to create these entities that are going to be able to do the work with you and kind of help you, be reporting to you as a manager. Because everybody's a manager now, including new people coming into the industry. So how do you have these entities that can do the work for you without that much training, right? Now it's able to know a lot more than what it could do and train on its own far beyond what we have the capability of doing right now. Be able to come up with new concepts on its own. Now it can do some of that right now. We're approaching that area, but it's not quite there yet. Obviously, to me, it personally feels like it's a PhD that's a teenager, right? Because it's smart, but also very dumb in some ways. And I want to be able to sometimes just yell at it and say, what the heck are you thinking? But that's where we are.
Sorry, is that the AI or a PhD you want to yell at?
Both, right? So, again, just like you said earlier, right? It's hard to kind of say what AGI is or ASI, whatever terminology you want to add out there. But it's whoever controls that is going to win. Now, from the U.S. side, I don't think all the companies that we're used to seeing today are going to exist in the next 5 years, to be honest. I really don't believe they will. And that's from my personal opinion, not A&M.
Sorry, are you seeing like legacy? What do you mean by that? You talking about like the OpenAI, Anthropics, or like the legacy company? When you say the companies that will exist?
The AI companies, right? Talking about Anthropic, I don't know about Meta. I don't even consider them an AI company, to be honest. But all the other ones, I think there's going to be somebody that's going to just take over and kind of just shoot for the moon and just keep going far beyond anything we've seen. And I think we're going to be approaching that within the next 5 years, potentially 10, but next 5 to 10. But that's, again, my opinion.
What do you? It's interesting. Like I hadn't heard someone say that before. Why do you think that? Is it fundamentals? Like it's not. It's the LLMs in the large scale. Is that more the issue, and that someone's going to find a different way to do this, or there's something else that you see?
No,
happening?
I honestly think, like other people, that the route we've been going of LLMs is not the route that we should be going, right? Now we've seen others talk about world models. I'm one of those believers that world models is the way to go. But it's going to be a mix of those plus something that we haven't even heard of before, potentially. But I think that whoever reaches that point of creating this AGI or ASI, whatever again, is going to become king and pretty much take over the world, not the world, but the space. It's my belief.
So getting back to kind of the analogy for a second, with Matt, like there was I don't know, a stalemate given it, like, okay, so at this point we'll destroy the world, so you don't launch, I don't launch, like is how we kind of went. Obviously there were a few scares there throughout the Cold War. Given the nature of AI, like does that kind of stalemate exist as a possibility, or is it merely that because you're going to be 10% better over time, that recursive compounding makes it that there's always going to be a single kind of winner in this? That we won't have the stalemate, that we won't have this kind of framework that says, okay, we're good, we're not going to use these against each other.
I don't know that we'll ever get to a single framework because you're still going to have rogue actors, right, that are going to do what they do. It's an unknown that we're just going to have to deal with and try to figure out a better way to make sense of that. Hopefully, using the tools that we're using to deter, right? Like, are we doing misdis? Like, what's happening there? So, I don't know that that'll be the case, but I think there will be a lot more analysis around what is that, why did it happen, is this a hallucination, is this something else, is this adversarial, is it a third thing? I think that steady hands in that regard will prevail. And then I think, when you talk about, I can say this like from an investor perspective, all of the 5 companies and some that are coming up, are, this feels like pets.com all over again, right? So, you have an idea, you throw it on a slide, you say I came from an AI lab and like we're off and running, and $500 million later, you're at it, right? And so that's
the traditional corollary, because pets.com failed and Chewy's very successful. Webvan failed, Instacart, like you have those situations where so is it the question I want to put, is it wrong idea, wrong time? Because what's the thing that's going to go to change that, right?
This one's probably going to get changed because it's a question of scale, right? The scale is just so massive that it's just so massive that it can't be, you can't overlook that, right? And so that's part of the difference, I think, this time, that the scale of not only, if you look at Stargate, you look at other things, right? You can go down the Oracle balance sheet and like try to figure this out. Like the scale is enormous.
But on the infrastructure, like Stargate, right? Like on the infrastructure side, we've seen this, whether it be the railroads, whether it be the internet build out, where we always tend to overbuild, right? Like it's just the nature of these things. And then if you do not want to be Cisco and $28 billion of revenue, the write off, you don't hold in the bag, and then of course you then have they have this cheap infrastructure and 1,000 flowers bloom. I mean, is that? I think it's probably an inevitable path because this is the nature of we've done this. But you said kind of the scale. Like, is that still what's going to happen?
Potentially, I think if you look at some of the data centers that are being built, whether it be Amarillo or other places, right? Some of the chips are evolving so quickly that where you're already in a different place before you're completely built, right? So there has to be, again, set of steady hands of like, how are we looking at this going into the future? And like, there's not we don't just make the money pinner go burr, right? Like that's not how that works. So there has to be some kind of return at the end.
One place that I think I'm curious your thoughts on where the analogy does fail is obviously the nuclear analogy. It was binary, like you either we would use the nuke or not, versus as we've seen over the last few months, and I'm sure in places that we're not seeing about like we're using AI all the time in kind of defense, and like it's used at every level and different things, and so it's a completely different where it kind of permeates. So it's like saying what's the equivalent of we used electricity during war, right? So how do you think about that? The fact that AI is permeating the whole stack, and it's not really the situation where you see like the arms race where it's as simple as I've got this bomb or that bomb. I've got, from the manufacturing to the energy to everything.
So there are so many postulates that are embedded in the last couple of statements. I'm not really sure even where to start. What marks this as a truly unique epoch for the history of civilization is that for the very first time, the advancement of a technology is not actually cloistered within the hands of a small number of people who are well funded. Some of the best advancements in artificial intelligence are coming from people who have no funding at all, and that capability is democratized in ways that are truly counterintuitive for anybody who's pursuing a capitalist agenda. So I would be very concerned or frustrated if I was in VC right now, because the reality is that the barrier to entry for contributing to the space is nothing. Nothing. DeepSeek was an exemplification of that. They were able to replicate a lot of what we were doing, not to the same degree that they initially had claimed, but to a much larger degree than American media was reporting on. And that replication came ostensibly from a collection of publicly disclosed materials from various American entities, and then some really intrepid research work coming from a couple of different universities. That is the face of artificial intelligence. You can't say the same thing for previous epochs of development. You can't say the same thing for chip development or for the Manhattan Project. You cannot say the same thing for anything that ultimately created a tidal shift in the way we operate, both on the battlefield and in the boardroom. And so you have to kind of turn all of these analogs roughly on their head, not only because of the democratization of the advancement of the field, but also because of the way in which we're measuring its efficacy. I've been a student of a man named Douglas Hofstadter for ostensibly 20 years at this point. And yes, while the goalposts continue to move on AGI and ASI, reality is that neither of those capabilities will be realized the way any of us are imagining it in our lifetime and maybe beyond, because fundamentally the architecture against which we intellect is not well understood enough for us to be able to create a digital or synthetic version of that. And we're not actually making progress against that problem. And so not only am I not worried about AGI, I actually think that we were closer to it in the late 90s than we are to it today. I don't have time to fully break down why that's going on. But it is actually a fascinating treatise in the state of American education, Western education, and our allegiance to scientific foundations. So all that to say, this is a different technology at its core than anything we've ever seen before. It's going to have implications that we don't fully understand because we are using the brain to understand the brain. So there are intrinsic issues with that process as well. But I'm bloviating academically in a way that is going to be disconnected if I don't reel it back in. And so really the implication that I think we need to be most concerned about right now is understanding how these different capabilities are being manifested in downstream industry. That's really all that matters. It doesn't really matter that Google claims or OpenAI claims that they've found an AGI in a box and an engineer quit over that. It's absolutely not true. It's fear-mongering for them to win on the infrastructure race. Elon and Meta and all the FANG companies are no closer to an AGI than they were 15 years ago. It's going to sound counterintuitive, but that is the actual truth. What they are a lot closer to is maxing out data center and power station capacities. And in order to win, they know that they have to induce fear to change the landscape. And this is what we're seeing with almost every operation from Amarillo all the way to El Paso. We're deeply involved with Stargate. We understand intimately what's going on there. And we're part of the actual deal itself that transacted a couple months ago. So we understand where this infrastructure play is going. And it's all a visceral and unempirical reaction to fear-mongering that's perpetuated by people who don't truly understand a scientific space that's devolving.
So you mentioned DeepSeek, and I want to kind of open that, like the whole open source versus closed source, especially as we think about this situation. Where do you see, I mean, since you said, like, you have the barriers to entry is extremely low, and smart people, like, how do we see the nature going forth of open source versus closed source AI? This is to all of you as well.
Yeah, I mean, just succinctly, we need to be honest about the actual impediments to building out these models. and acknowledge the actual marginal differential that's in there. I mean, there are a huge chunk of our macroeconomy right now is based off of a projected return on artificial intelligence that really isn't differentiated. And that's a really big problem. When DeepSeek was announced, there were a lot of intentional narrative shifts that were designed to try and insulate the tech sector from imploding, because objectively it should have after that. A lot of these foundational model deltas on the margin, we realized that didn't actually exist. So here's a fun example. Our lab, I can see it from here, has about 30 or so scientists. If I were to put them all in a room, have 15 and go one room, 15 in the other, and give 15 of them all the Legos you need to build the Millennium Falcon with no instructions, and then the other 15 gave them a week to develop an LLM that would be competitive with ChatGPT. Guess which would have a more robust product at the end of that week? By a large margin, the team that was working on the LLM would beat the Millennium Falcon team. Just think about the actual value of that kind of activity. And it's not bravado. Any applied science firm could, all your port codes could do that exact thing. It's not because Valkyrie is so amazing. When you really understand that the economic inefficiencies that's manifested by that example it now serves as the underpinning for so many asset classes in the macro market, you should all be terrified and be buying gold. I mean, I'm being hyperbolic, but it's really concerning.
So, Travis, what do you think about kind of from an investor point of view, like where open and source?
He's completely not wrong, and I 100% agree. But from a capital, when you get into the capital markets, it takes on a life of its own, right? You have not only the technology space, but you have the capital market that feeds it, right? You can see that when you talk defense tech valuations, when you talk AI valuations, when you talk, right? There's, the math just doesn't math, right? And so when you get into a space like AI, and you do have the open source capability, that becomes the part that gets terrifying for folks that are in it to get to a 100x outcome or 10x outcome, right? So it becomes a little different.
So what do you think? And so I don't know if people read about like the Century and maybe not report that came out. This was like a few weeks ago, I think, but completely crashed the market. It was like, okay, we're gonna, AI is gonna be able to do all these things. They were using DoorDash as the example. You can create your own DoorDash. Of course, I thought was funny is all my friends in the marketplace VCs, like they don't fundamentally understand marketplaces and the fact that you just can, like, yes, someone's been able to recreate Uber or recreate DoorDash for a long time, and that's not the thing it ends up being. So when you have this kind of technology stack, you have these abilities, but and Travis, I want to kind of stay with you for a minute. Like, it's not necessarily like, okay, that's great, but that's not how you build these kind of businesses. Like, there's more to it than that. Obviously, the market came back after that.
There's always more to it than that, right? And there's more to it from a capital perspective. Lots of companies have different moats. Some of them are technology-based. Most of them are. Some of them are founder-based. Some of them are something else, speed to market. There's a bunch of different moats that you can try to figure out that get you a space in the market and either maintain that or start to be more successful there. So I think, it goes back to there's not just one evaluation criteria, as always. And so the question, the lawyer answer of like, it depends on how that's going to work, right? It depends on the particular market space we're talking about and how that, AI will have an impact there.
So from a framework perspective, how are you guys thinking about like the investments and obviously these kind of returns and not being susceptible to the shifts that are happening?
So we don't, I don't have enough money to shop at the LLM store, if that's fair.
Few do.
So
$110 billion, round is, not in the checkbook?
Yeah, that's, so there's that element of it. But I think that I personally have always been a picks and shovels investor. That's why I brought up, adversarial AI and the intersection between cyber is I think, there can be gold out there for, a VLA model, digital worlds, however you want to look at it, right? But, selling energy, selling chips, stuff like that, you'll definitely be rich, right? You might not find gold, but you'll definitely be rich on the picks and shovel side.
How do you think about then the lengths that this is kind of, I'm trying to think how this is, so we have the speed, you have things like the open source coming in, you have this kind of balance between things like we saw it, like, I know it's not AI, but like the Flash crash of 2010, which kind of like algorithms performing as they should, but just then outside of parameters. So how do we kind of balance the safety aspects and saying like, okay, we don't want things to run out of control. I don't like human in the loop as a phrase that makes it feel like it's separate, while at the same time avoiding clear regulatory capture, slowing us down, and regulatory capture on one side, and then not being Europe on the other side, where like, oh yeah, we lead in AI regulation and have no AI. I said all easy questions.
I don't think that's what our biggest concern is. If AI is going to hurt us, it already has started, and it actually comes down to what they call PSYOPs, or psychological operations, or the breakdown of identity. And I've spoken about this before, and it's well documented that I'm obsessed with this problem, where really individuals are existentially manipulated by digital tools, either for nefarious geopolitical reasons or, candidly, to increase engagement on a platform, and it's really destructive for their own identity. Said another way, traditionally human beings, we are absolutely intrinsically very social creatures. We depend on social connectivity. When that connectivity is replaced with synthetic and digital apertures, we start acting weird. Here's an example of how we act weird. Gen Z is the first generation that states that if the United States was to be invaded by a foreign adversary, they would not take up arms. Traditionally, that stat has always been above 50%. As of right now, it's 12% would take up arms. That's not because all of a sudden they're weak, or all of a sudden they are worried or scared, or because they love China. It's because the sense of identity and national pride or patriotism is dramatically undermined when you operate in a relatively insular world. I'm very, very, very concerned about the ramifications of a generation that has not only that perturbation against within their own identity, but many, many, many that could all be articulated. That's the biggest concern from my perspective. I also think that keeping all of these national operators in check with kinetic munitions and such, all of that is really, so I'm going to say something a little controversial, but please hear me out, because the entirety of this is important. For the first time, maybe in the history of our planet, modern kinetic activity has reached a point where civilian life has been guarded way, way more than it ever has before. If you look at the number of combatants killed versus civilians in an AOR, that ratio has gone down dramatically, particularly in the last 10 years. So much so that despite the media reports that we've received, and I'm not weighing in on either side of any conflict, media reports you've seen about certain conflicts would make you feel as though civilians are being killed indiscriminately and only a handful of combatants are part of that. It's actually not true. And it's actually not true in a lot of AORs. For example, you may have received you may have been inundated with information about the incredibly tragic, extremely difficult to deal with moment with the Iranian school. 163, I believe, young women were killed, girls were killed because of faulty information, bad AI that basically fed that cluster bomb. Sorry, not cluster bomb specifically. I think it was an AIM-9. But in any event, it's a very, very, very terrible event that happened. That was 4 or 5 pounds of weapons-grade munition when millions of weapons-grade munitions have been deployed. And that edge case got a lot of attention. That's giving a warped perspective of actually how effective our kinetic operations are. Reality is that our guys in Afghanistan had about a 6-to-1. Well, depends how you measure it, but about six civilians were killed for every one combatant that we engage with. That's a very, very high number. If you look at Israel right now, it's like 1.4 to 1, right? So I'm not weighing in on one side of a conflict or another. I'm actually required not to for all the roles that I serve in. I'm simply stating that there is an intentional shift in how we're processing this information as a microcosm of this larger psychological operations that is being manifest, particularly with our youth, that's contributing to the demoralization of the American state, intentionally to try and detangle them from that identity. And that what that looks like in 30, 40 years is a collection of 330 million Americans who really don't have a relationship to each other by design. TikTok operates so differently here than it does in China, not because Chinese are trying to get us to waste our time on TikTok, it's because they're trying to get us to be confused about who we are, whereas TikTok is used as an educational tool in China. It's not about engagement and wasting time. That's the vehicle for us to be able to, that's a vehicle for us to stop caring about who we are. And it sounds metaphysical and sounds esoteric, but this is truly what's happening, and there's empirical studies to show this is the case.
Going.
On that,
I mean, as the guy who watches the start of the Four Nations USA-Canada hockey game with Freebird playing in the background almost daily, absolutely.
so go ahead.
I agree and I disagree. And here's why. Before I came into the university, right, before I became the dean there, I thought just like that Gen Z was this generation completely disconnected, just way out there in many different ways compared to, I'm a Gen Xer. So once I got to know the students, and keep in mind, Texas A&M is a massive university, and I got to talk to all walks of life there, all from different colleges, etc. And I also realized that Texas A&M is a very conservative university compared to others, that it was nothing like that. Anywhere from very patriotic folks that are willing to do whatever's necessary to defend their country to AI, just seeing them, some of them run circles around me. And I've been doing AI for over a decade, and these kids are just insanely smart. What I did see, though, is the entrepreneurship bug across most of that Gen Z. They all wanted to create something. They all wanted to just get their hands dirty and start kind of building immediately, as opposed to just going the normal route of, hey, let me learn English or let me learn whatever. And it was interesting from that. So when I hear all these studies and all these surveys or whatever it is of the Gen Z, I'm always curious where the data is coming from. What schools, where is it coming from? Because I have not experienced it. Even the places that I visited, other universities, and I talked to other students. But again, I'm not tapping into the whole population, right?
It wouldn't be the first time Texas A&M was several generations behind, but I would say, sorry.
War's going to start out on the panel.
Jokes aside, it is a viable question. What I wonder is, this actually may be a micro example of how different tribalism is erupting. The cognitive biases the survivorship bias that you may actually be experiencing in an environment like Texas A&M, which absolutely is traditionally more conservative. There are a lot of incredible, I would actually argue it's one of the best places in the country to go from. Shift that we're seeing, and it's the kids, and it's the plurality, or if not the majority of kids, who are sitting in the back of the class and never talk to you at all. And my contention is I think that's what's going on, that there may be a survivorship bias that's being exemplified here. For example, 63% of all Ivy League students right now from the NIH, this is data from the NIH, 63% of them are undergoing some sort of medication for depression or mental health illness. That number is literally 10 times what it was 35 years ago. So I would love to aggregate the data. Of course, we want to evaluate whether or not these sources are sacrosanct or we should tear them apart. But my question is really, it might be that this is happening at a grand scale, and those who are not experiencing this, because they are engaging in ways that we called out earlier, are exemplifying strengths and really a superlative strength that's going to really counter their peers. Said another way, we may be exacerbating the talent and wealth gap because there's a small pocket of students who don't operate this way, who are interacting with you in the way you describe, but the majority of students are actually getting increasingly isolated, and that's where a lot of the data comes from. And that breakdown, that binary categorical shift is really going to exacerbate a lot of the sociological problems that we're dealing with right now. socioeconomic problems we're dealing with right now. That's a contention.
What school did you go to?
Georgetown and George Washington.
I'm going to try to break you guys up. I want to. I thought I was going to until Charlie came back over on that question. I wanted to kind of lean on the positive side. I feel like we've been a little more on the one of our Schrodinger's box. But what does this look like if it goes right? Like how does how does the 10? What happens over the next 20 years that we actually see on that side of the equation? I'm going to make you guys say something positive.
Who wants to go first?
That's a tough one. So, because for every positive, there's a negative associated with it.
You said
right?
the negative, so let's get the other side.
Yeah, I mean, business is going to completely change, and I've seen it change. I mean, the very first company that I really tapped into is a manufacturing plant, 42 sites across the globe, 2 to 3 planners per site. After AI being put into the workplace, I mean, they needed 1 person per region. Did they go that route? No. They ended up doing 1 person for every 5 sites, but that displaced some folks. They didn't get fired or anything like that. They ended up getting trained for other roles. This is 2018. Technology has far advanced since then and is now at a place where it's disrupting many industries. These agents, as they become more and more, not self-aware, but better trained to help with those tasks that you do on a daily basis, you have to start breaking down those processes that you have across your organization to rebuild them, right? Your role kind of changes completely. To me, that's going to be a very, very exciting time from a business perspective, me coming from a business school, because the workplace is changing completely. If you think about HR is human resources. That's going to be now human and AI resources. That role itself, as an example, is going to kind of become a hybrid of not just HR, but other roles associated with it as well. So as we start seeing this change, I want to think positively of where we're headed with it. I think if the companies that adopted, quicker than others are going to hopefully see the biggest returns. But there's also a lot of R&D still to do in there, right? That's my take.
Yeah, I think to flip the name of the panel on its head, I think you usher in an entirely new epic of world peace that is, completely unbreakable. So there is that element that it's possible, it's completely possible, and then that frees up folks to, be creative and do other amazing things as you get more efficient. Like it becomes the age of abundance, depending on who you talk to or who you listen to, becomes a real thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I actually, I have a proclivity to be very positive. This maybe just got me on a bad morning.
Was sure on that one?
Yeah. So, our whole, I think I said this earlier, I believe we're at a transitional generation. I think that there's no reason, tactical, technical, resource reason, anybody is not drinking clean water around the planet. It's been solved. Desal paired with fission is something that we could distribute across the planet. 83,000 commercial ships are using fossil fuels right now. They could all run on nuke today, all of them. There are hardly any problems that get in the way of making sure that kids are fed and sheltered and educated. And right, you go through the list of what it takes to make sure somebody gets all the way to 18 without being abused. We have all of those solved, all of them. We also have tools that could undermine all of that. And I think that the FANG group really represent a lot of threats there. So we have to intentionally decide how those technologies get deployed and to do it in a way that, yes, returns capital. That's super important to all of us. But also does it in a way that realizes those altruisms that we take right to our core. And Valkyrie's vision, our company's vision, for shameless plug, when I was 5-6 years old, I would go back to school and pick out a lunchbox. And I'd always pick out a NASA lunchbox, right? I loved NASA. It was like cool. It was like a little emblem that represented my tribe. I loved nerd stuff. But when I was a couple, 5 or 6 years old, NASA hadn't done anything that cool in a long time. 1994, 95. Shuttle, meh. Gemini, really cool. Apollo, super cool. question is, what lunchbox are kids going to be reaching for in 2050 and 2060? That's the real question. I believe fervently they're going to be Valkyrie lunchboxes, or otherwise it wouldn't go to the right. That's our charter, and I'm either delusional or visionary, and they both look the same. But
Can I get Valkyrie lunch? Can I get a Valkyrie lunchbox?
yeah,
swag?
absolutely.
Tell me that swag exists.
They do exist.
That is
The swag's
awesome.
out there.
That is awesome.
I will. Yeah, anybody ping me today, I will send you a Valkyrie lunchbox. But
What is a Valkyrie lunchbox?
it's literally a lunchbox.
No, I mean, what does it stand for? What's
Sure.
the vision?
The vision is to give a child, 5 to 10, little girl, little boy, something that they can see in themselves for what American innovation and the realization of all potential can be manifest. The reason Apollo was successful was because Disney he himself decided, hey, there's some things we're going to do for positioning this. Let's get a bunch of farm flyboys who find their way in the Navy and then find their way walking on the moon to drive around in cars you could buy from any dealership. That was all incredibly intentional, so that at the time, 250 some odd million Americans could see themselves in the most incredible feat that had ever been accomplished by a human being. That is exactly what's missing today. That's not going to be filled by any of the FANG teams. That's not going to be filled even with best intentions from any of the Musk properties. And what I believe fervently, is that children need to reach and see that so that we can realize that transitional generation. To realize that potential where AI and all these advanced compute techniques create a utopia as opposed to the default, which is a dystopia. And that's all manifested in what lunchbox a 5 or 6-year-old reaches for. Whether it's some antiquated technology from the mid-'60s or something that's emblematic of what they could participate in and grow.
So, I get, as the moderator, the last word. I will say I agree about having kids seeing things and being inspired. And so, I took my 2 oldest kids down to Brownsville to see a SpaceX launch. We pulled them out of school because it was on a Monday. But yeah, the ability to see these things in the physical world, looking outside. My 6-year-old is like, oh, I see a self-driving car. I see the Waymos and these kind of things. And so I think the ability to dream again and be able to, what the Apollo landing was for, my parents and the like. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.